The Iowa International Center Dialogue Series is a monthly educational program available at no cost to the public, thanks to the generous support of DuPont Pioneer and supporting sponsors. Dialogue events and videos offer a unique opportunity for our community to engage in and learn from important cultural conversations with international experts, and to draw on and highlight the extensive knowledge these individuals bring to our schools, workplaces, and community. For more information about the Dialogue Series and the Iowa International Center, please visit www.iowainternationalcenter.org.
We can't go in depth into any particular point about, the issue of human trafficking. It is a tremendous, horrendous crime that is happening today in our towns, that is happening today in Iowa as well, as we're going to be seeing by the examples that I'm going to share with you today. I want to give you just a word of caution. I'm not going to go in depth. I'm not going to identify places just because this is being videotaped, and obviously out of concern for my safety and the safety of my clients, I'm going to talk in very general terms, and I'll be glad to discuss or talk more about it off camera. So I want to talk to you today about the dimensions of human trafficking, what it is, why it happens, who is a victim of human trafficking, who are these traffickers, where are they, how do they operate, and then I want to leave you with good tips about how to identify potential survivors in your communities. How many of you work in the health system, law enforcement, social services? All right, good, okay. I imagine that most of you go to some sort of church, community services, you're observant and you're vigilant about who is in your neighborhood, who comes and goes, right? So those things are good things in order to identify again and screen and see some of the red flags that you can then report. You're gonna hear me saying, please don't do this at home a lot, okay? I know that we have some brave souls that want to really help and are planning on going to nightclubs to save these women. Don't do that. You can get killed. And it's just that. This is a business, a very profitable business. And if you take the merchandise away or if you mess up with the merchandise, you can be killed. So the best thing that you can do always is to report to law enforcement. And speaking of which, there's a lot of work to do on awareness with our folks at law enforcement. They're making tremendous strides towards training and awareness and asking the right questions, but we're still in the very inception and beginning of addressing these horrendous crimes. And then briefly, if I have time, how many lawyers do we have here? Yay. I'll talk to my colleague about, and to all of you, a little bit about the legal protections that we have available for survivors. So I think sometimes when you listen to the survivors, you get a lot more than when you hear people going blah, blah, blah. So if I can do the trick, just bear with me. There you go. I think you should listen from a very great campaign, Look Beneath the Surface. Have you heard about this campaign? Anybody has seen some of the posters and some of their amazing stuff? Okay, I'm gonna leave you with this for about 3 or 4 minutes. It should work. It just takes a moment. Oh, kind of impatient here, no? Is it happening?
Would you be all right if we didn't do it
short? Yeah, good. Yeah, absolutely. I just want people to. Great.
There we go. Sorry.
So this is one of the many programs that exist today in the United States to assist with raising awareness, training the public, training professionals in identifying survivors, and also providing services, comprehensive services for survivors of human trafficking. We're a little bit away in Iowa from achieving those goals, although we have good legislation, which is a beginning, at least. So just let me ask you, in what industries or sectors do you think that trafficking may occur here in Iowa? Home?
All of it.
All of it? Like what? Give me an example.
Agriculture.
Agriculture, very well. What else? Packing plants. Hotels. Conventions. At the fair. Anywhere where services are needed, right? Low-skilled workers are needed, are potential places where human trafficking may be happening here in Iowa. So before we talk about human trafficking, I want to share a couple of things, a couple of cases, early cases that happen across the state of the nation, actually, and then we'll talk about the Iowa ones. In the United States versus Soto case, the Freedom Network worked really hard, the advocates for the Freedom Network worked really hard to ensure that survivors in this case had the services and the justice that they deserve. In 2003 in Texas, a couple of women were thrown in the back road of a dirt road in Texas, and they were sexually assaulted. So these women sought help from law enforcement. The case started as a sexual violence, sexual assault case, and because of the help of the advocates and the patience of the officers and the enlightenment of the officers to ask the right questions, they realized that the women were sexually assaulted, but they were also part of a large human trafficking ring that was happening. Women were being brought to Texas, to very rural areas in Texas, and forced to cook, clean, and being held as sex slaves. They couldn't escape, and only when they were thrown as trash in the middle of nowhere is when they were able to identify them and work with them. This is again an early case where 7 men were convicted of human trafficking, and they were sentenced to 23 years in jail. In the United States versus Ramos, in this case, the victims were transferred from Florida, recruited from Florida, and brought to Arizona. They were held captive in an agricultural setting, picking up fruit. They were unable to leave the camp. The camp was guarded. They had men walking with guns. There were informants working among the workers with cell phones, and anytime they would hear conversations that were trying to escape, or they were seeing people trying to escape, they were immediately instructed to call and use their cell phone so that people could be stopped and hurt and harmed. In this case, three were apprehended. 3 traffickers were apprehended. The first one is spending 15 years in jail and paying up to $3 million in restitution to the survivors. The second one was sentenced to 10 years, and the third one is escaped and is at large. In the California v. Lee case, 4 South Korean women were brought through Canada and made work as sex slaves in California again. These women were forced to have between 5 and 10 customers daily, 7 days a day, 7 days a week. California decided not to rely on federal law, and actually they were able to convict under California law, and one of the traffickers was convicted to 25 years in jail, etc. The reason why I wanted to share these cases with you is for you to see the variety of settings. We're talking about sex industry, we're talking about agricultural industry, we're talking about home. Some of the cases that I have seen in Iowa have been about that. They have happened in the agricultural, in the meat packing plant, as well in in our own neighborhoods here in Des Moines. Particularly, one of the cases that I recently worked on, the women were recruited in restaurants in Mexico, and they were promised jobs and visas. So they were to enter lawfully into the country and then come to Iowa, where they would be able to take care of an elder man and cook and clean in exchange for a good salary, and again, the opportunity and possibility to perhaps eventually gain lawful permanent residency in the country. Targets were single women with children that were isolated, and they were very vulnerable. When the women were crossing, they realized that they were not crossing with visas, that they were being smuggled. By the time they're at the border, it's too late to turn around and to run, because they already have paid a lot of amount of money that they don't have. So they have a debt now in Mexico to pay for the trip, to pay for the visa, and this is part of the manipulation of the crime of human trafficking. Target vulnerable people that are in poverty, trick them into providing and creating debts and selling their belongings and doing anything that they need to do to be more vulnerable, and then bring them over here and put them in a position where they're very easy to be abused. When the women came, and this was a ring of human trafficking, obviously, it was successfully so they could bring in women. When the women arrived to, one of the women in particular arrived to the home, she didn't find an elderly man. She found 40-some years old man, divorced, that was living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and showed her the bed that they were going to be sharing from then on. First thing that happened in human trafficking situations is that victims are taught what happens if they try to protest, if they try to escape, which is beatings, rape, physical hurt, physical harm, among other tactics and techniques, threats to hurt themselves, to hurt their family and their loved ones. Remember that in the human trafficking operation, you have more than one player, more than one person that is part of it, starting with the recruiter. The recruiter knows where you live, where are your dependents, where are your loved ones. And I was just thinking, as I was preparing, how can I convey the vulnerability and the desperation of some of the women and some of the men that I work with? And I just thought, where does my heart go? And my heart goes to my children. What wouldn't you do for your children? Who wouldn't die for their children? Who wouldn't give anything that they have in order to feed their children? And that's just something that I went to kind of understand and relate to the survivors that I work with. For some of you, maybe something different. So when you're working with survivors and you're thinking, wow, I'm so tired, why doesn't she leave, or why doesn't she want the help, which is oftentimes the case. We're there, we're talking, they are free to come and go because the chains are invisible, and they're still there to get the help that is available to them. So when you are in a situation like that, or where you're trying to understand why don't they leave, just go to the thing that you love the most, and probably the trafficker is using that against you. So what are we talking about? What is human trafficking? So human trafficking is a process with a means to an end. So it's the recruiting, harboring, moving, or obtaining of a person by means of force, fraud, or coercion, with a finality and a purpose, which is involuntary servitude, debt bondage, slavery, or sex trade. The Freedom Network Institute is an amazing place to get a lot more training, and to maybe Google their name if you want to go more in depth into the particulars of human trafficking. I'm using some of their materials today, and I want to give credit to, of course, to their incredible work. Freedom Network is composed of 30 members across the nation, and they're actively representing many of the survivors that are daring to be visible or are encountered today mainly by law enforcement. So let's do a little exercise, because I know for some of you that have gone to these charlas or these meetings or gatherings, I'm sure that you have heard this before. And I think it's important that we understand truly what the law defines as severe form of human trafficking and what are the components. So let me give you an example. And we're going to have a little exercise, and you guys are going to help me because you already understand the components of human trafficking. So a woman comes to Aurelia's mother in her Mexican village to offer Aurelia a job as a cook in America. She promised that Aurelia would make $200 per month and could go to school. The woman brought Aurelia into the U.S. by car and took her to a bar in Texas. Aurelia was told she would be working in the bar and had to pay off $7,500 in debt to the owners by working as a prostitute first. When Aurelia refused to do the work and asked to go back home, the owners beat her and threatened to harm her mother if she didn't do the work. So looking at the first component, what do you think is the process in Aurelia's case? Was she encountered? Did she come over? She was recruited, right? All right, so she was recruited, and see how the trafficker or the recruiter goes to someone that Aurelia trusts very much, her mom, right? So it looks like this deal that her mom is making for her should be a genuine, good one, because her mom is going to look after herself and for her well-being, right? And this is a name changed, right? But this is a too often popular way of recruiting, okay? What are the means? By fraud, right? And probably coercion, because the trafficker is saying, you better pay off because we're gonna get your mom, right? So either you pay off and you're in debt for a long, long, long time, and this is how you're gonna pay us the debt, or else we're gonna get to your mother, right? And what is the end in this case? All right, so debt bondage probably is not spelled very well, but sex trade, right? And it is very often for women that are enslaved sex workers to also be obliged to clean and cook. We had a case a couple years ago where Legal Aid called me to try to work with this group that was swiftly moved. And that's one of the main issues that we have when we're trying to reach survivors and we're trying to talk as they're being moved from place to place. The women were being forced to cook for the men that were working in the fields and clean for the men that were working in the fields, and also to be used as prostitutes for the men that were working in the fields. So we had calls from the men saying, they took my H-1 visa, I don't have a passport, I don't like what's happening in here, I had this debt that I paid to get my H-1 visa, I don't know how to get out of here. And we had the women saying, I can't take this anymore, they're gonna kill my children if I talk, can you help me? And by the time we truly identify the group and what was happening and the dynamics, they were being moved to Ohio. So the only thing that we could do here in Iowa, because we missed the boat, thank you, was to start working with Ohio, because we knew that they were going to be moved there, and find out what was the next place that they were going to be moved to. Okay, so why is this happening? Because it's super profitable. It is a money-making business machine. When you have marijuana, whatever drug, and you take it, you have risk a lot to make it happen, to transport it, to then sell it, and then once it's consumed, it's gone, it's done, right? But human beings continuously produce profit. And then when you cannot use a human being as a sex slave anymore, you can always use her as a cook or as a cleaner or as whatever else, as in a sweatshop. So this is a never ending. As long as the person is alive, you're making money out of him or out of her, right? Involves very little or no risk. One of my clients, that was moved from Thailand through New York to San Francisco, I said, and how did you make it? I mean, I'm an immigration lawyer. My head was spinning. How did you make it through all the ports of entries and all the the customs and customs and border patrol? And well, because the traffic traffickers were buying real B1, B2 visas, and then they were tampering with the visas. So by all means, the visas were good visas. So they were able to travel, with these visas, on these visas. And the picture obviously was tampered with, so it wasn't the picture of a person. So by the time she got in the car, and I'll talk a little bit later more about it if we have time, so the recruiters came to the elderly man of the village that everybody loved and trusted. And he said, do I have a job for you? They are coming over, they think that you're pretty, 19 years old, beautiful woman. They want to take you to the States to promote you as a model, and you can study there. Well, heck, I'll go too, right? Who doesn't want a deal like that when you're in poverty and you have a bunch of brothers and sisters and your parents are saying, if the elderly man of the town is saying, go for it, you can help us all. Well, there she went to help them all. As soon as she was in the car towards the airport, they took her real passport and they provided her with a false passport. And she kept insisting, this is not me, this is not my passport. And they said, do you want to make it or not? This is legal, don't worry about it. We've done this a million times. Everybody knows us in your town, don't worry about it. She came to the States, she showed the fake passport, and now the traffickers say, boy, are you in trouble. You committed fraud. That's a crime. If they get you, they're going to throw you in jail big time. And not only that, but you have a debt because you have to pay us the plane ticket, the hotel, the visa, and everything, so you owe us $10,000. So to begin with, we're going to take you to San Francisco, and you're going to work for us. She spent close to a week in this apartment, and anything that happened in that apartment, I'm not gonna describe in depth, but there was, injected with drugs, beaten, raped. The trafficker, the one that brought her into the States, he was a good guy. He said, this is my advice. We really want to help you. Just work for us and pay off the debt, and maybe 5, 6, 7 years, you're free, and you can be sending money to your family, and then you can be whoever you want to be, etc. So she starts forming a kind of link with this guy and believing and trusting more because she doesn't have any other place to go or anyone to turn to. Long story short, how do I end up meeting this woman? One of her customers, Vietnamese, and they don't talk English, so I have no idea how they talk to each other, But he rescued her. He, realized that she was there against her will, and eventually, because he was a customer of many, many months, took her and brought her to Iowa, where he continued to abuse her, now as a domestic, violence situation. She came to our services, and she came to the police attention as a survivor of domestic violence. That's how women that have this kind of histories ever come to us and ever come to light. The officer, the immigration officer, this is a time where, this is 2002, we didn't even pass human trafficking laws in Iowa. So nobody really knew what to do with this person. VTVPA, the Victims of Trafficking Protection Act, was barely passed in the year 2000. Nobody knew what to do with these cases. She didn't need services as a victim of domestic violence. She got that done well. She needed the other big traumatic event forever, marked her life forever, services that we couldn't provide because we were not ready. Eventually, she adjusted her status as a lawful permanent resident as a victim of domestic violence. So that story turned out a little bit okay. So again, very profitable. Traffickers charge women inflated praise. Again, we talk about all this. Not only the traffickers profit from women and victims, but also the smugglers traffic from victims. This is an Iowa case, and I'm going to speed it up because I can keep talking about Iowa cases just to make the point, which is that they are here, okay? But in any event, this is a kid that is being smuggled initially. He's being smuggled from Mexico through Arizona to Iowa. When he is already in Arizona, the smuggler starts saying, you want your kid? You want your kid? $2,000. but I already paid $5,000. I don't have more. You want your kid? And the kid is screaming in the back of the phone, I'll sell anything that I'll sell myself to pay those $2,000. So she pays those $2,000, and then they call her again, and they said, you want your kid? You want your kid? $3,000. And she said, truly, I have no more money. I'm at the bottom of my money. Well, then we're gonna sell your kid, and we're gonna get that money out of him. So that was the idea. The idea is continue to profit from that smuggling situation, but the end of it was not to turn the kid to Iowa. It was to now get him into a trafficking ring, exploiting him sexually. This kid was 8 years old. We had an angel in the FBI here in Des Moines, and this is again the year 2001, 2002. I call him. I said, I don't know. I'm not a cop. I don't do criminal law. I just work with victims. I don't know what to do about this. And I had never seen anything happening so fast in my life. This guy, because we were calling Arizona, and they were like, Ms. Parras, do you know how many kids and calls do we have here in Arizona like yours? Thousands. So the mom is calling saying, please help. Arizona is saying, this is one of many. What do you want us to do about it? You're in Iowa, figure it out. And but for this guy at the FBI, and it was one of those days that you're going on vacation, so nobody is at the office anymore. Our luck, but we were lucky. So this guy immediately contacted Arizona, and I had never seen anything so quick happening. They went to the town. This is mom in the middle rural area working for a meatpacking plant, low wage, had barely any money. Anyways, they bugged the phone. The trafficker and the smugglers kept calling her about money and what have you. We started working on this case, and I was a witness. They started working on the case at 10 a.m., but by 8 p.m. the kid was in the car with the FBI. I've never seen anything so miraculous as this case. So we have good folks in Iowa that want to do the right thing. So we all need to talk about this issue to our cops, to our prosecutors, to our judges, to our nurses that see women that have been beaten, going to the emergency room, kids that all of a sudden stop going to school for whatever reason, kids that have been moved 3 times in the school year and keep on moving. So those are the things that we all as a community need to start talking about, need to start focusing on, need to start realizing that this is not just a screw-up mom that is moving the kid around, that there may be something else behind this moving so much of a child, etc., etc. Okay, so needless to say, children are oftentimes one of the best and most profitable human beings for traffickers. They're offered as virgins and guarantee that they don't have any illnesses and that they can be exploited at will without being at risk of any communicable diseases. So let's look a little bit about how finally we get a definition and criminalization of severe form of trafficking in persons. And then I'm gonna break it into sex trafficking and the labor trafficking. I know that sex trafficking is sexy and everybody's interested, and we all hear the stories about that are true, about young, beautiful women being recruited in parties. But I want to take you to the international human trafficking, and I want to bring you to what is happening here in Iowa, and it's not that sexy, and it's happening mainly in the labor field. So I'm going to touch on the sex trafficking briefly, which is defined as severe forms of trafficking in person, sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. The chains are invisible. People think about human trafficking and think about, and we saw some of the images, right? Poor woman in the corner with the chains tied to the bed. Very there is no need for that. You know, I had a colleague the other day as we were working on the human trafficking task force, and he said, we had really good turnout in one of our events, and a survivor came to one of our law enforcement, Mike, that works for the AG's office, and he's spectacular in the work that he's doing, and said, I am in a human trafficking situation right there. So he was astonished, and you know, and my colleague was saying, well, you know, how are these victims allowed to come to these events, right? Because it's not like they're allowed. Obviously, the person is not telling the trafficker, I'm going to check more information, right? But the traffickers are so sure about the strength of those chains that truly women are freely moving in our community and go back to the trafficker again because of this link to the force, the fraud, or the coercion. 18 years of age is a done deal. They don't have contractual capacity. They're not gonna look at whether there is a volition on their part, and they're considered sex trafficking victims automatically. And also, it can be that or the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision or obtaining of a person or labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. I keep repeating these three words because truly they're the key to why they don't leave and why they stay. Okay. So, in the sex trafficking process, women and girls are lured to different countries based on false promises of legitimate employment. So it's not like women all of a sudden say, oh, I want to work in the sex industry, right? And if that happens, there is no fraud or coercion or force, and therefore it's not human trafficking unless it's the under 18 years of age. So they are promised legitimate employment. Again, they are paid for their visa and their working papers, and when they arrived, as the case that I explained to you from Iowa, they find that they're forced into the sex industry and that they must repay their purchase price before they can be let go. 44% of the cases that have been studied by the Department of Justice show that the victim knew the person who tricked them. And oftentimes they're even their own boyfriends, like in the case that I was telling you about the Mexican women. So the traffickers became intimate with the women, you know, and so they were their boyfriends. And so they were going to get them a good deal in the States, where they were going to be placed in homes, and they were going to have these jobs, and maybe they were going to marry them, you know, once they got to the States, only to find out that nothing of that was true. The average age of a victim of sex trafficking is 20 years old, and half of them are estimated to be children. And the profit from trafficking here alone in the States is $3 billion. These are some of the industries that are covered as recruiters, right, for very legitimate purposes. And these are other related industries, mail order brides, domestic servants, foreign adoptions, etc. But this is a story that they tell them, you know, come and be a dancer, an actress, a model, a nanny, come and work at a factory as a waitress, and this is what they actually do: prostitution, strip clubs, pornography. So moving from the sex trafficking into the forced labor. So these are the ways of basically enforcing somebody into working. And you know, mainly we're talking about again, debt bondage, people that owe money and that will never be able to pay the interest of that debt bondage. We're talking about involuntary servitude, which basically covers those who enter by force, fraud, or coercion into some sort of situation when they are forced to provide services. Some of the cases that I worked in a place that shall remain nameless, they were recruited directly from very little tiny towns in the mountains where poverty was at large and there was no employment, no way to feed their kids. And I visited their places in one of my trips, and literally they have dirt roads. Some of the houses have the bare minimum. Kids drink coffee for lunch and breakfast, and maybe once in a blue moon they may have some protein in their diet. So we're talking about like extreme poverty. They were recruited from these towns to be brought to Iowa. To pay for the trip, they had to mortgage their houses. And this is something that, as I'm working on these cases, I didn't get, because they were saying that they had to pay 18% on their debt to the bank or the people that were lending them the money. They thought it was the bank. And I was like, well, 18% annual, that's pretty high, you know? And they said, no, a month. So I kept I lost track of the numbers. You know, once they were saying, you know, $7,500, but 18% a month, I kept, you know, you will never pay that debt. And you will take whatever job they tell you to take. And like in this particular case, when they tried to organize, it was really cool. I mean, these people are coming from countries where labor unions are strong and they do organize. The owner of the plant stood in the door and said, anybody that crosses that door is going to immediately be deported because I'm calling immigration right this second. You are all working with false papers. You need to bring me your new papers by Monday, and anybody that crosses that door and doesn't go back to the line is going to be removed. And they all turned around, and they all went back to the line. So who are the victims? Anyone can be a victim. Immigrants, legal immigrants, U.S. citizens, men, women, children. The key of these people is their vulnerability, and that vulnerability can be exploited or manipulated. Just think about this for a second. Who do you think is most at risk of being trafficked? Just shout. Children, runaways. What else? Who else? People that are in what conditions? Poor, unemployed, right? Underemployed, persons that are enduring violence, that are being persecuted in their countries of origin and are fighting for their lives and willing to take on any deal just to escape that kind of situation, right? People are trafficked for all these, you know, services: domestic prostitution, factories, agriculture, restaurants. Your head would spin. Restaurants, tiny restaurants. When you go to your restaurants in rural area, you may want to go to a restroom and see what's happening in the back of the restaurant, all right? And then run quickly out the door. If you are seeing that there are mattresses on the floor, that there is a back room with, you know, dirt and people that are crowded, if you often go to that particular restaurant, whether you always see the same old man picking up the dishes and he's malnourished and he doesn't look in very good shape, we're going to talk about how to approach that situation. But, you know, don't think exotic. Think rural Iowa, Chinese restaurant, mom and pop farm. Think that. So the human traffickers, you know, we all have this fantastic picture in our head about this big man with tattoos, right? That is going to punch your face if you move. Those are not your traffickers. You can see them a mile away. Your traffickers are your neighbors, your friends, your boyfriend, your family members, the village chief, people that come back and are brought back to recruit, business owners, families, organized crime, even diplomats and governments. Those are your human traffickers. And people are recruited again through acquaintances, newspapers, fake employment agencies, word of mouth. Some of them are abducted, obviously. They are kidnapped. This is from the Center of Study of Intelligence in 1999. The problem that we have with the statistics right now in human trafficking is that we're not counting all the survivors because they're not coming to the front line, right? They're not saying, me, cut me, I'm here. So we're missing a lot of the survivors, and we get different estimates and guesstimates from different agencies. But the Center for Study of Intelligence estimated that 30,000 trafficking victims are coming from Southeast Asia, 10,000 from Latin America, then 4,000 from Soviet republics, and 1,000 from other regions. Ports of entry are your main hubs. You know, when you go and you travel through main hubs, just think about this presentation and keep an eye for things that may be suspicious so you can report if needed, right? Victims enter normally, you know, international victims of human trafficking enter sometimes with legal papers, with B1, B2 tourist visas, with J1, with F1 student visas. And it looks like truly they're coming to study and that they're going to be studying, to find later that that's not the case. They recycle valid passports, as I explained to you in the case from Iowa. They also cross the border without inspection, as I explained to you about the smuggling case of the kid, the 8-year-old child. They use coyotes to smuggle victims, and smugglers then make money out of the trafficking victims, etc. Once in the state, they move quickly. That's why it's so hard sometimes. You know, we're trying to work with groups that are moving, or survivors that are moving from house to house, from restaurant to restaurant, from camp to camp, and it's really hard to be able to form a relation and to assist them, and that's part of the manipulation and the rhythm of human trafficking. They control their victims, as I told you throughout the presentation, in many ways. Some of them are getting paid. I just had a man coming into my office, and it was just heartbreaking because he's not ready to leave. He's not ready to report. This is a very old man. Well, I shouldn't say old. Now I'm going to get in trouble for that, no? Let's just say that he looks very old and run down, and he looks malnourished, and he came because he wanted to know if there was anything that I could do as an immigration lawyer for him. And I kept running through all my, you know, normal, typical information about how did you enter into the country? Do you have family members that can help you? Have you ever been persecuted in your country of origin? And all that blah, blah, blah that immigration lawyers do so well. And then I thought, wait a second. So you're working? Okay, and how is work? And that opened a Pandora box. Just that one question, how is work? Yeah, okay. Well, you want to tell me more about it? No. Okay. All right. Well, let me tell you about your rights. How much are they paying you? $40 an hour. How much are you working? 72 hours to 80 hours a week. Where do you sleep? My boss is so nice. He let me sleep upstairs in the restaurant. And he charges me for the room and service. Okay, so you're making $4 an hour. So you do the math, okay? And, you know, do you want to look for another job? I don't have papers. And who has your papers? Well, he said that he may be able to help me if I work hard enough, eventually. Okay, so in those situations, what do you feel like doing? Calling Mike, calling all your cops friends and saying, go and raid this restaurant right this second, right? But we'll talk a little bit about, you know, other steps. Victims are hard to identify because, you know, in situations of international survivors, they may be disoriented. They don't know their rights. They don't know where they are. If they're in the middle of rural Iowa and they have been brought and threatened, they may not even, I mean, you know, you all know about the wonderful buses and, subway that we have running in rural Iowa, right? So if you want to run, good luck. they may come from, this is very important, most of them oftentimes come from countries where law enforcement is not to be trusted. They're corrupt, they're part of rings, they're part of trafficking, they're getting profit, they're making money out of this. So they don't think that in the US they're going to be helped. More often when they're told you have committed a crime, you're a criminal, you're going to be spending a lot of years in jail if you try to ask for help. They may not understand that they're victims. Like I was talking to this man the other day, and my first job was to make him realize that what was happening to him was not okay. And we barely could get past that, let alone let's work on your TV stuff now, right? Okay, so this is how cops are finding survivors. They're finding them through raids and immigration violations. They're charging them with prostitution, with gambling, with extortion, with a number of crimes. And they're convicting victims, and they're deporting victims. And that was one of my main struggles when I was representing survivors in the Swift raid, in the Postville raid, in the DeCosta raids, was just to make them slow down, so we can ask the questions. You don't know who you have in there. And when you're mixing traffickers with victims, you for sure are not going to get anything from there. In one of the raids I was told, well, when you find one of those victims, just bring her to me. Well, can I have access first? Right? Can I have access to the raid first so I can provide free legal services and do screening and ask the questions that you are not asking right now? So we have some work to do with our federal prosecutors in the U.S. Federal government in Iowa. All right, you can also be looking at these survivors in the restaurants, in community organizations. One of the not so young men that I had the privilege to work with, he spent hours and hours in the streets picking up cans because he was a victim of human trafficking, and he was he had a huge debt that he had to repay just for the trip. He was thrown in the basement. The dogs ate first, and then he ate. And for him to repay, he had to clean the dishes of the restaurant, and then at night he will go through the streets just to make some more money and pick up cans. So maybe that old guy that you're seeing going up and down your street digging into your trash and picking up cans deserves some additional questions, right? These are some of the flags. I talk a lot about, hopefully you have already like a lot of ding, 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 ding red flags going on in your head, and you're thinking already, And these are, this is not an exhaustive list. Some of the key red flags is if they're living with the employer, if he owes money, if he's living in poor conditions in spite of working 72 hours a day. If you see, in the back of businesses or restaurants, people, sleeping in cramped spaces, inability to speak alone, when you have people rooming in nail salons, if the person that is helping you speaks English, and what happens when you start coming back and trying to establish a relationship with this person, and is somebody interfering and changing the person that you have been working for the past 3 or 4 weeks. And I told you before, please don't try this at home, because I had really great friends that wanted to save the world. And as we started the work back in the year 2000, they started going through Chinese restaurants, and trying to ask questions. Don't do that. As I told you, we need to have our cops, our prosecutors, the people that know how to do the work, to take the lead on this. What we need to do is to report these crimes. What we need to do is to ask the questions, and if identified, run to law enforcement and push them, and be persistent and don't give up. Because if it's nothing, it's nothing. But if it's something, boy, you may have saved somebody's life, right? And just because you see all these things that I'm showing in this slide doesn't mean that the person is trafficked. So don't jump into conclusions, but at least you can initiate some of the dialogue. These are things that I often ask in my practice. I do a lot of legal clinics, I do a lot of volunteer, and every opportunity that I have, I ask, how are they treating you in your work? Are you happy? you know? And if you're not happy, what would you improve? Because if I say, is everything going bad in your job, are you being trafficked? You know, probably I'm gonna get I'm running out of here, you're crazy. You're gonna get me killed or get my kids killed, you know. But if you ask other kind of questions that may lead you to a potential trafficking situation, I think you can start establishing a trusting relationship and have a referral. Can you leave your work? Do they pay you? Do they pay you for all the hours? Have you been hurt? Is your family being threatened? Do you live with your employer? Where do you sleep? Where do you eat? Are you in debt? Those are things that you can ask in any settings, in hospitals, in community situations, in any, you know, any place where you may think that you have encountered a potential survivor. I'm just gonna give you a glimpse of the legal remedies because we have about 2 minutes, and I know that people have to get back to work. VTVPA is the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, year 2000. That's where we start doing serious work. Not that before we didn't, but that's where we have some of the weapons that we need, some of the investment in manpower, in training, in money, in services that is needed to address this crime. Focus on prosecution, protection, and prevention. So new crimes are defined, and we now have many states that have their own human trafficking laws, like in Iowa. Protection provided to trafficked persons through immigration relief and other benefits, and prevention through State Department. These are some of the options for relief and recovery, regardless of whether you are a U.S. citizen or not, including repatriation, because some women do want to go back home. We also have immigration remedies like the T visa and the U visa. The T visa and the U visa are tools for law enforcement. These are tools for law enforcement to be able to get witnesses to report and to collaborate. And in exchange for that collaboration, once they have certified that the victim has been useful or will be useful to the investigation or the prosecution, is when you can file and present the case with the Immigration Service. And if you meet all of the requirements, the person may be lawfully present in the country and may be able to also include family members in the protections, the immigration protections. If you want to learn more about this, please visit our website at Asista. It's ASISTA, and we have presentations and PowerPoints and materials on all these remedies, and I'll be glad to maybe in a future comment bore you all with all the particulars. Iowa passed our human trafficking law that went into effect in the year 2006, and I'm glad to announce also that recently, in the year 2014, there were amendments made to Chapter 7108. So now survivors that are under 18, and this is kind of controversial, but we don't have time to address it, are children in need of assistance automatically. And before that, in order to get protected, prosecutors and cops were charging them with the crime in order to keep them in jail and keep them protected from the traffickers and separate them from the traffickers, which was very problematic. If you're an immigrant with a charge of prostitution, you may be a person with a crime of moral turpitude and may be ineligible for immigration relief. So this is a good change. It has you know, some good and bad stuff in there, but now children under 18 are considered children in need of assistance and are not charged criminally. And of course, we still have the affirmative defense for any survivor charged with any of the crimes that we were reviewing before, if it's related to her own victimization. I want to